Welcome to First Gen 101, the podcast where first generation graduates share their stories and career tips. I'm your host, Miguel Sanchez. In this episode, John Manna shares his remarkable journey from life as a performing musician to graduating from law school. Whether you're exploring a career pivot or need inspiration, John's story will motivate you to keep pushing forward. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the First Gen 101 podcast. Today, we have John Manna. John, thank you for being here today.
For having me. Happy to be here.
John, I mentioned it a few minutes ago before we went live, and one of the things that really excited me about this session is that you're also a musician. Not only did you go to law school as a first-gen student, but you're a musician, and it's just really a joy to see someone very passionate, not only about their education, but also about music. You play mainly guitar from what I understand, and I know you're also a songwriter. Before we go into that, why did you decide to go to law school? Go from music to then law school. How did that happen?
Yeah, I had been performing and writing and recording music for most of my life, starting at a relatively young age. And for a while, that was what I would have said that I wanted to do. I guess for what it's worth, going through my life, high school and undergrad, I was always able to relatively balance my musical interests with whatever I was doing full time. And I ended up going to undergrad in criminal justice. I went to Dutchess Community College for 2 years after high school and majored in criminal justice. And then I ended up transferring to SUNY New Paltz after 2 years at DCC after getting my associates. And there I majored in sociology with concentration in criminology. So I was always interested academically in the more criminal justice and law route, whereas outside of school, I had a very active creative ambition as well. There's the whole stereotypical quote unquote starving artist, someone who's only pursuing music. And there's a lot of merit to that. And I have a lot of respect for people who have those sorts of creative ambitions and they go all in on that. And for whatever reason, that just didn't really feel like that was what I should be doing. I didn't really feel like that life was for me. People do it. For some, maybe it's a bigger risk than others, and maybe they get some success out of it. Maybe people who go all in on music because they're putting all of their eggs in one basket, they're able to put more work into it, and maybe that ends up paying off for some of them. And that's something that I was thinking about a lot. Like, this is something that I'm really interested in. Should I go all in on my musical passion? Would that potentially make my chances better, and would they pay off in the long run? And at the end of the day, I just didn't really feel like that was something that I wanted to do. I was still fortunately able to do what I wanted to do and get a lot of stuff done with my musical interests alongside me going to school and working and all of that. So I was thinking, okay, like, I don't really think going all in on music is right for me. So I was getting to the end of my undergrad experience, and with what I had majored in, the thing is too, with me, a lot of my friends and a lot of the people that I was spending most of my time with, they were all also musicians. So I was going off on my own, or at least it felt like I was in a lot of ways, wanting to continue my education in undergrad. And it really felt like I was a first gen bachelor's grad as well. And it really did feel like uncharted territory. I didn't really know what I was doing when I was picking majors. I would pick a major, and then I would pick a major, it almost felt to get that out of the way. And then afterwards, I would look up what are potential jobs that I could do with it. And it was towards the end of my time in undergrad when I started thinking to myself, okay, I'm interested in law academically, but I am a musician. And I also feel like that's a big part of my identity. And I was thinking, what could I do outside of that? What could I do that maybe incorporates a little bit of both? And I ended up at the time in undergrad coming to the conclusion that I wanted to go to law school for entertainment law. And that was actually my original thought, that I wanted to go and combine both of those passions in my life and go for entertainment law. And I remember talking to one of my professors at SUNY New Paltz and pitching that idea to him. And he said he thought that was an excellent idea. Some people, maybe they think about wanting to go to law school their entire lives, and that could be a very good thing for some people. In my case, it was the very last semester of undergrad. And it was, in some cases, even the summer after undergrad was when I finally made the decision that I wanted to go to law school, and ended up studying for the LSAT, signing up for the LSAT later that following year. Because I didn't make that decision to go to law school until my last semester of undergrad, it's not like I was set up to start law school the following year. I had to take a year off, figure out what even the LSAT was,
Mhm.
figure out what law schools were potentially good options, and then ended up taking the year to study for the LSAT, which was another thing. Another thing I was doing relatively, which it didn't really feel like I had a lot of people to go to ask for questions about LSAT prep and all of that, and what should really be expecting. How valuable of a score should I be trying to go for? What are the best ways to study? Some of that was on me. I wasn't very good at, at like using the resources I had and going on the internet. So like I was just doing it on my own. And yeah, ended up taking the next year to study for the LSATs. I got a relatively average score on the LSAT the first time. I could have taken it again. And that's something that I would think about later too is should I have taken it again? Should I have gotten a tutor? I really only studied mostly by myself, just in my local library in my hometown. Did some research after that, ended up applying to a few schools and got into Pace Law School, which at the time I was living in Fishkill, New York. So it was about 50 minutes to an hour from Pace and White Plains. That was also towards the beginning of the pandemic at the time. So I knew that at least in the beginning of my law school career, it was going to potentially be a hybrid setup. So I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I could do the commute from Fishkill to White Plains. Yeah, then I ended up fortunately getting into Pace and accepted for the following year. So I had a gap year in between finishing undergrad and law school. But honestly, I guess to kind of pinpoint answer your question, it was just I didn't there was never a point in my life where I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. Even once I decided I wanted to go to law school, one thing I would always hear people talk about is, okay, a law degree is useful, even if you're not practicing law. And I see that a lot now. Like a lot of my colleagues that I have now having graduated, a lot of them are very talented in what they're doing. They're not all practicing attorneys. Some of them get into jobs with corporations or companies where their law degree is still a very valuable
Yeah.
asset to their skill set and what they're able to do. But they're not all practicing lawyers. And depending on what your interests are, that can potentially be a valuable and worthwhile route to take for some people. So that was another thing I was thinking when I was going to law school is, okay, it seems like the way of thinking that it seems that you get from law school and a lot of the analytical reasoning skills and the way to issue spot, it seems like those sorts of skills are very valuable no matter what you do. So it seems like okay, I graduated undergrad. I don't really know what I'm going to do with my undergrad degree right now. I also have my musical passions that I can continue, that it feels like I can continue regardless. So let me just keep my education going. Let me get a law degree that it seems like maybe I'll figure out I have other interests in this field that I maybe didn't know were there at first. But either way, it seems like it'll be a worthwhile experience, and it seems skill sets and experiences that could help me in my career in ways that maybe I am not able to see at this point.
One of the things that jumps at me, and this is something that we tell prospective students, and that is the JD is going to give you, as you mentioned, the skills and the knowledge to apply that in different career paths, whether it's litigation or in-house counsel, or other careers. Having that JD is going to give you those opportunities. In fact, I keep up with alumni on LinkedIn, and I can tell you that every other week someone has changed jobs, gone somewhere else, because partly you're able to do that with a JD. So it just gives you more versatility. And so during that gap year, what did you do besides preparing for the LSAT? Did you have a law related job? What were you doing in that year?
And so when I was finishing up undergrad, I actually not law related at all. I was working at a pizzeria for my entirety of the time in undergrad. I was working part time at a pizzeria. I also worked briefly for a brewery at one point. That was starting in my summer after finishing undergrad. And then I didn't really have that much experience working in the legal industry before law school. I really didn't. I interned at a local courthouse during
Okay.
one of my final semesters of undergrad, but I was in undergrad. I wasn't in law school at that point. So an internship at the courthouse, what that really meant was I was just observing local small claims and honestly, traffic ticket proceedings. It wasn't really something where I was getting much actual legal work experience. And I think some of that probably came from me being a first gen or a
Yeah.
prospective first gen law student at that point. Maybe I was telling someone else who wanted to go to law school and was thinking about studying for the LSAT. Maybe I would suggest looking for some sort of courthouse work or law firm work, whether it's part time or just even as an unpaid intern to get some experience if they're able to do that. I do think that's something that could be valuable. In my case, I really didn't get much experience like that before law school. While I was studying for the LSATs, I studied mostly during the day again at the local library Monday through Friday. But aside from that, I was working at a brewery on weekends, and I also worked seasonally at the Michael Kors actually for that winter season. So I was doing those two things, and I would tell people at those jobs about how I was studying for the LSAT, and they were all very excited for me on the journey that I was going to be going on. But I didn't really get much legal experience. I didn't really have a fully grasp what I was really getting into at that point. I was studying for the LSAT, and that was getting me into the headspace for what it's worth. But as I'm sure the LSAT itself doesn't really test substantively on really anything having to do with law. It's more about standardized tests that has to do with your critical thinking and your reading comprehension. But at the time, it felt like a Hail Mary with me studying for the LSAT. I hadn't really had any real experience in the legal field aside from I took the occasional law class in undergrad. And actually, when I was at SUNY New Paltz, I took criminal law, which I didn't realize it at the time, but that professor who taught me criminal law at SUNY New Paltz for undergrad actually ran it like a traditional law school class. Like they did the cold calling. We're just holding up the attendance sheet, calling out a random name from the very beginning of the class. We were reading cases. And at the time, I was thinking, this guy's out of his mind. Why is he conducting class like this? Little did I know that was relatively the norm once you get to law school. That much actual legal field experience prior to law school. And by the time I took the LSAT, it was that February during my gap year, and then that following March 2020, that was when the COVID pandemic really started, and that was when, at that point, there was the stay-at-home policy. So going into law school, I really didn't have much legal experience, and a lot of me figuring out what attorneys do and what the actual legal profession requires that came with me actually getting into law school and now being at the law firm that I'm at now.
In adding to that point of not having much exposure, and this is just general advice to prospective law students, if you can, as John said, have that law related job, if you decide to take the gap year, I think what it really does is put you in a place where you can understand the legal culture. Just like medicine and other fields, there's a culture, there's a way of doing things. So think about having that legal job so you can understand the culture that's in the legal space. So you're taking the LSAT, we're now have to be home for a relatively long time. And then you start law school, and it's an unusual time because if I recall properly, at the time, classes were set up in this schedule where you didn't go to class every day. There was some sort of pattern that, to be honest, I don't remember. What was the most challenging aspect of starting law school?
I remember first hearing what the term big law meant or what the term big law was probably a few weeks into my first semester. I didn't really know very much about what sizes in law firms really meant, what it really took to get to specific law firms versus others,
Yeah.
what those law firms really looked at. I had no idea going into law school that by going to a specific law school or by not going to a certain law school, that alone was arguably making your journey or your prospects easier or harder than potentially others. That was something that was very new to me. Also, the value in the potential value, depending on your goals are in class rank, that was something that was also very new to me. I couldn't say that during undergrad I was as invested of a student. Frankly, I wouldn't have said that I was a very passionate student in undergrad, and that was in part because I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I was thinking much more short term. I hadn't really thinking as much about my long-term goals. So because of that, class rank wasn't really something that I ever really thought about in undergrad. And now suddenly in law school, that was something that a lot of people were talking about. The curve, I hadn't really known very much about what the law school curve was and how that really affected all of your study habits and how you looked at finals and how you thought about the semester in your first year specifically. And I don't really remember hearing about that until orientation or maybe shortly after I got the taste. And that wasn't really something that kind of clicked for me of what that really entailed for your finals in law school until my 1L year, that were relatively surprising. And it did make it somewhat intimidating at times.
Really?
One thing that you'll hear all the time in law school for various reasons is imposter syndrome. That was something, that was a phrase that certainly became part of my regular vocabulary going into law school, was feeling like I was among those people who was experiencing that. And that would come with, when you go into law school, when you start something that's, even if you do have experience or even people who have done it before, it's still very new. You're still getting thrust into a whole new group of people doing work that you've really had to do before. Again, even if you've worked in a law firm, most people will tell you that the work that attorneys do is very different than what you
Yeah.
actually do in law school. So just having to do that sort of dense case reading, it's a very new experience, even for people who do know people, or even if you've done the research and have heard about what it's like, it's still something that's really new for you once you're doing it. So, and everyone remembers, I think, and everyone probably had, most people probably have this experience at the beginning of law school, is you start hearing about what other people are doing. Maybe a few weeks into your first semester, you start hearing, oh, so-and-so's doing this many practice problems, or so-and-so is already starting to outline. And that's something where if you know nothing about law school, some of that could be a helpful wake-up call of should start thinking about. Maybe there is something that I should take from what this other person is doing. But one thing that I learned in law school, not even having to do substantively with law, is the importance of trusting your own instincts.
Right.
There are usually things that you can get from other people that are helpful, but at the end of the day, you have to also trust that you know what's best for you. Because if you've gotten to that point where you're in law school, you have to trust that you have what it takes to get through it. And that doesn't mean that you should completely ignore what other people are doing, but you also shouldn't let that stress you out at the same time. It's helpful to get advice and potentially borrow study habits and tactics from other people, but you have to, at the end of the day, always trust what you're doing too, and trust that you know what's best for you.
So in this process of feeling some sort of this imposter syndrome that you described, how did at any point did you communicate that to your family? How was your relationship with your family in relation to law school? Did you talk to them about this regularly? Was this something that you kept to yourself? How was that dynamic?
Interesting question. I think that one thing that made those feelings of imposter syndrome, I would say, complicated or difficult to really solve or deal with, was in part the fact that at the time, I was commuting to law school from Fishkill. It was hybrid. So I was going in person 2, maybe 3 times a week at most. And then the rest of the time was remote. And relatively soon into law school, I did start, fortunately, making friends in my class. But because of it being hybrid, because of me commuting, it did really feel like I wasn't fully inculcated in the law school culture at that point. And that's something that I think ended up really, it served in my favor really well once I started getting more involved in the community of law school, because then once you start connecting with people and you're able to vent those sorts of feelings that you have, you'll find that a lot of people, like one of the solutions and one of the antidotes for that is hearing that a lot of people feel the exact same way as you, and having those sorts of people that you can just vent to of, here's how I'm feeling. Is this normal? Here's what I'm doing. Is this normal, or should I be doing more? And then having someone tell you it's okay. Everyone feels like that. Don't let that freak you out. What these other people are doing, you're doing just fine. Trust me. Here's what I did, and it worked just well for me, and you're already doing better. Having those sorts of connections that you can really vent to and have them vent to you as well, whether it's in your class, whether they're upperclassmen who become your mentors. I think that's something that ended up being very helpful to get to that point. However, again, in the beginning of my 1L year, it took a little bit for me to get to that point, having been in a class that was hybrid and commuting about an hour and still feeling like I wasn't really, it took a little bit for the culture of law school to kind of come together.
Part of the law school process, I think, also, and this is from feedback I hear from other students, alumni, is building that self-confidence, as you mentioned, trust your own process, your own way of doing things. So building that self-confidence. How do you think being a musician helped you with that self-confidence? Do you think you were able to maybe pick it up faster because you're used to going up in front of people and performing, and sometimes you're at rooms where you play, maybe you thought you play your best and nobody claps. Do you think that had in some way help you get through that process of building self-confidence in law school?
That wasn't necessarily something that I was always thinking about and how those two kind of work in tandem together. But I think that certainly played a role in my overall confidence and my self-assurance, in the sense that you're absolutely right. When you're a musician or any type of artist and you're putting yourself out there, whether you're performing live, whether you're promoting songs or anything that you've written or anything that you've done, there has to be of not caring what people think. And you have to, either the easy way or the hard way, develop a relatively thick skin to, even if you are doing pretty well, and even if a lot of your work needs to be, you still will always have that sort of apprehension of, you still have to, it still forces you to build up a sort of tolerance for things like that. And I think that, again, even if I wasn't thinking of it consciously, that was something that probably played a big role in my confidence, even if not in my ability to do the work, but also in just the way I conducted myself with my colleagues, and wasn't really afraid generally to introduce myself to people and to smile and say good morning, and things that seem small, but I think can play a big role in improving your law school experience. And that certainly played a big role in my confidence, and also just having an outlet. Law, it's very works your logical and reasonable and rational side of your brain. And then in a lot of ways, music seems to work the exact opposite of your brain. Having that sort of balance at the end of the day, when I could go home and try to write a song or just play guitar and just as an outlet, like having that sort of balance, I think kept me sane. And a lot of people have something like that for them, whether it's music or whether it's sports or exercise or any sort of activity. And it helps you not get as much, I guess, tunnel vision with the law school path as well.
You were thinking about entertainment law. Did you continue that path? What changed? And tell us about what you do now.
Not end up continuing actually that path for entertainment law. That was, like I said, the original catalyst that made me interested in law school. And obviously, your first year of law school, you take all of the core or most of the core bar classes. You don't have much say in what classes you take your first year. Your second year is the year where you start to have much more freedom. There's still some requirements, but for the most part, you have freedom in what you decide to take in law school. I did end up seeing that entertainment law was a class, fortunately, that PACE offered. I took that first my first 2L semester. I took entertainment law, and I did end up finding it fairly interesting. It actually is a fairly musician focused class too, which at the time I did appreciate. However, I think I started to learn more about what entertainment law entailed, and I started seeing that it's easy of a process to simply, for example, apply for an entertainment law firm. It seemed like a lot of it seemed to be more solo practitioners. It seemed like it was very competitive, especially if you wanted to, for example, go for an in-house counsel position at a record label. I ended up working my summer 1L at the Legal Aid Society of San Diego, which I actually got through the PACE public interest law fair. And then I ended up really enjoying my time working for legal aid in San Diego that summer. I think that was when I started feeling like more doors were opening and I started feeling, okay, I know I originally wanted to do entertainment law, but now I actually did this other legal job that had nothing to do with entertainment. And I actually really enjoyed it. And I felt like I got a lot of meaning out of this other job. It's my second year of law school. I was still interested and open to entertainment law, but I felt like my horizons were starting to broaden and I started feeling, okay, this is starting to not this is starting to feel less like something I'm doing just to see what happens, and it's starting to feel like I actually can start to build other interests in the legal field that I didn't know were there at first. To my second year of law school, I started also getting involved with the case law advocacy program. I applied and tried out for moot court at the time during my summer of 1L for the upcoming 2L year. I ended up fortunately getting put on the Wechsler First Amendment moot court team for that first fall 2L semester. And fortunately, I got put on a team with people that I was friendly with for my first year of law school, and I ended up having a great experience with that as well. We fortunately, with the help of my colleagues, we advanced to octofinals in my first competition. So I think those sorts of experiences also that along with my job after my semester in 1L started making me feel like, okay, there could be more here for me than what I originally was thinking with entertainment law. And at the time in law school, I was still I was still going into the studio on weekends. I was in some cases working on music videos on weekends, and I would still. So like another big thing is I didn't feel like I needed to necessarily even combine law and music at that point. I was thinking like, okay, I'm still doing music. Like I'm still playing out when I can. I'm still putting out music relatively regularly. I'm still able to fortunately find time to go into the studio and to work on these projects. So that's not going anywhere. And I'm still going to be able to do that no matter what. So let's see what the rest of the legal field has to offer. And I started feeling like I was taking more chances and trying more in a way that I was enjoying more than I expected. And in a way that I started getting more and more excited for as I went through my 2L year. And then going into my third year of law school. And this is part of the reason why I think that building a network is one of the best things that you could do in law school because it'll help you with your sense of purpose and feeling like you belong. But then it also comes in handy in ways you might not be thinking at first. I got my first job after law school clerking for a judge in Bergen County Superior Court in family law. It was a 1-year position. I got that job from someone that I had met in law school who she had graduated a year prior to me, and she had said, "Hey, we have some judges in Bergen County that are looking for law clerks." I think this wasn't too late in my real year to the point where I hadn't been really sitting down and sending out applications that much yet at that point. So I was very open minded. Ended up getting an interview, and I was thinking, okay, I don't know exactly if I could have certain options, but this 1 year clerkship experience after law school seems like a great way to get good experience and to get my foot in the door and see if I like family law too, and see like that's something I haven't really tried yet, and I haven't really done very much with in law school yet. So it felt like that was a good opportunity for me to start my legal career. I'd heard about the value that clerkships can offer and working with the judiciary and getting that sort of perspective on things. It seemed like to me that was a good opportunity to start with and a good way to get some experience. And that was an opportunity that I got in very large part just from meeting people in law school and from networking and trying not to sort of fall into my own silo and try to meet as many people as possible. It paid off very much so in helping me get my job with the clerkship after law school. And then also it helped me getting the job that I'm at now. I'm at a law firm in the financial district in New York City now.
Dean Anderson, who is the dean of Hub Law, he generally starts his welcome address to the incoming students, the new class each fall. And more or less, he starts off by saying that the school, your class, is also your network. As you said, John, it's not just having that network in a passive way, but you have to be intentional about making those connections in law school and definitely after law school because they will help you and you should all also be helping others along the way. And John, as we're coming to the end, I want to ask you two last questions. After you've been through this process, if you could talk to yourself back as a incoming 1L student, what would you say to yourself?
With this sort of question is that I'm happy with the path that I've gone on, and I'm happy with the choices that I've made. So if I was talking to myself prior to my 1L year, I wouldn't really want to tell myself anything that would very much change any of the choices that I've made, the good ones and the bad ones too. I'm happy with where I've ended up and where I'm going. So I'd be hesitant to say anything to myself that would change or make anything go differently, because I'm grateful for how things have been turning out. But I think that I would want to reassure myself that I'm on a good path for me. Look back now and I think, wow, at the time when I decided to sign up for the LSAT at that point in my life, I never fully understood or imagined the opportunities, the experiences, the people that I would have met, some of my best friends that I still talk to and that I will probably continue to talk to this day and onward, from law school, from jobs, those sorts of experiences. I would want to reassure myself that I was on the right path and that I was making a great decision that would very much advance my personal and my professional life in ways that I never thought possible. And I wouldn't want to do anything different, even the mistakes and even maybe the classes I shouldn't have taken and even the things like that. But I wouldn't want to tell myself anything that would change that, but I would want to make sure that I reassured myself that things were going to work out and that I was in for a great, worthwhile journey.
It does sound like your law school experience has been transformative. The last question I have, John, is you're a songwriter. If you could write a song about law school, about your law school experience, what would you title it?
What's funny is I have written a song. I can't say it was about law school in general, but I mentioned I worked for Legal Aid Society in San Diego. And I was at that point in my life, I'd never been to San Diego. I'd never been to that city. I didn't know anyone in that city. So it felt like I was taking a leap of faith. Like, I'm going to go do this public interest job for a summer in San Diego. I don't know anyone there. What am I doing out there? I'm going to drive there. Am I out of my mind? So I remember thinking like that was, I had never even, I commuted to undergrad too. Like, I never really even left my family house at that point. So it felt like I was taking a huge leap of faith. And I remember I wrote a song at that point, which actually I wrote that song in my 1L year. And I actually recently was in the studio recording it. So it should actually be potentially coming out sometime in 2025, hopefully. It's called 99 Cent Dream. And I wrote that kind of about just feeling like I was taking a step and feeling, okay, there's no better time to just take a chance like this. And who knows what's going to happen. Maybe it is weird of me to be feeling like that things like this will work out, but I'm just going to take this chance and see what happens. What do I have to lose? Now there's not going to be a more convenient time to get these sorts of experiences. That is an example of a song that I did write in part about a transformative experience that I was going through in law school. And it was called 99 Cent Dream again.
Are we looking out for it? And for our listeners, John, if someone wants to listen to your work, how should people connect with you? What are your social media pages, websites? How would you like to point people to you?
It's funny, in my job and everything, I go as my name's John Manna, but as a musician, I go by Johnny Manna. So you could find me on Spotify and Apple Music and my website, johnnymanna.com. But that's JohnnyManna, and that's on all the streaming services, and that's my website as well. And that's also my handle on Instagram. You could also find me on Instagram by just searching John Manna as well. But if you type in either John Manna or Johnny Manna into Google, you'll most certainly find me.
That's great. And we'll definitely add those to our show notes. And we'll also have them on the screen. You will see them on the bottom of the screen, as John mentioned. So, John, thank you very much for spending your time with us. For the rest, I'll be on the lookout for our next episode. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend. Don't forget to leave a review. Until next time.